We've got a question from Uncle Lou, and boy, I cringe to see what I'm coming up on here next. Here we go. Mark and guess, why do you think Ohio State has such an abysmal record against the SEC? 5-12, 3-10, or 2-10 in bowls. Yikes! I'll hang up and listen. Thanks. Can I please take this first?
Oh yes.
I think you need to take some of it into context, Lou, in regards to the matchup. So I actually wrote, because this irked me for quite some time, I wrote like 10,000 words on this once. Defending Ohio State's bowl record against the SEC. And at this point, this was before the Arkansas win. And who else have they beaten recently to get it to 2?
Alabama.
Yeah, well, yeah, I remember that game. I might have watched that. Woo! Yeah, so this was at the 0-8 place that they were about a decade ago or 15 years ago, when Jim Tressel probably had lost to LSU and Florida back-to-back, and Ohio State was just getting hammered. And sure, you can't argue with 0-8 and what is now 5-12 overall, 2-10 in bowl games. But you need to put it into context and look at each individual game. Understand that in many of these matchups, there was an Auburn loss in the Hall of Fame poll in '89. There was a game against Alabama in the '95 Citrus Bowl after the '94 season. Many of these matchups, Ohio State was elevated based on brand, based on who they are, based on drawing people to the TV set. When there was not a championship involved and an automatic slot in a bowl game, they were taking on an Alabama team in the '78 Sugar Bowl that tied and split a national championship, and Ohio State was 9-3. They didn't belong in that game that year. They didn't belong taking on an Auburn team that was ranked in the top 10 when Ohio State was 8-4 that year in '89 at the Hall of Fame Bowl. They got a number of those matchups because they were Ohio State, and they were going to be elevated in the seedings because the Big Ten and the national sponsors wanted Ohio State in favor of a team that was actually better in the Big Ten in any given year to be slotted. Again, my last example will be the '95 Citrus. Alabama came within 1 point of playing in the national championship that year. Ohio State lost by 7 touchdowns to Penn State and lost 4 games that year. And they were pitted up against an Alabama team in the Citrus Bowl, and they took them right down to the wire before losing in the last 50 seconds on a Sherman Williams touchdown run. So you got to put the games into context.
And Tennessee Chiefs with the big cleats.
There you go. I agree with you. The Alabama game that you referenced in '94, '95, Sherman Williams, I think, ripped off like a 70-yard touchdown run with like a minute to play. The game was essentially tied. I mean, so it wasn't like they got blown out. 2 of those losses are to South Carolina in the Outback Bowl, one with John Cooper, one with Jim Tressel. The one with Tressel, they hit a field goal on the last play to win. I mean, they found ways. I mean, they lost to Georgia and Garrison Hurst in the '90s. They were on the wrong end of some tough matchups against some good SEC teams. The Tennessee game with Peyton Manning, it was pouring down rain, and that game was decided, I think, 14-10 or something like that in a driving rainstorm. So, they got blown out a couple, and Florida, obviously Alabama, they got blown out. And LSU was a 2-touchdown game, but otherwise they've played right with most of these teams in a lot of these games, and certainly had Arkansas beaten, allowed them to come back, and then won it at the end. And of course, Alabama, fell behind 21-6, and then just dominated the last 3 quarters of the game, and punched the bully right in the mouth. So that's the one. That one should count for 10. So I think that their record, because it was a playoff game, it should count for 10 in my book. So really, I think their record's like 10-8 or 11-8 against SEC teams in bowl games.
To your point, Steve, the Georgia game, they lost 21-14. They're driving with a couple minutes left in the game. They fumble at like the Georgia 25.
Yep.
Kirk Herbstreit, the quarterback in that game. Robert, I don't forget who fumbled, but there was some kind of exchange that was mishapped. And then the Tennessee game in a driving rainstorm. Again, they're down by 6. They drive late, and they threw a pass out in the flat, and I can't remember who fumbled the football, but they were about 25 yards from taking the lead in the last minute of that game as well. So those are excuses to a certain extent. Yes, Eric, I see your comment. Excuses. Absolutely. Those are football plays that were made, but I'm putting into context. If every game was like 47-3, that would be one thing. We're evaluating performance and ability. We're not just saying wins and losses. We know what the wins and losses are. Did you ask the question? You asked the question, so we're making an explanation.
42-35.
And when we're talking about these close losses, that's why the Tennessee wearing illegal cleats in that driving rainstorm is still a point of contention, because maybe they don't win with those illegal cleats that they were allowed to wear after the fact.
Did we mention illegal cleats?
Illegal cleats.
I think they were like 10 inches long. I mean,
right. They look like
stilettos.
Yeah, and then you also have the 2011 bowl game where Ohio State should have just stayed home and chose to go to a bowl game. And really, if you want to strike any bowl games from the record, strike that one instead of the Arkansas game.